Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Welcome to the Table podcast. My name is Khalil.
My name is Sean.
And we are excited for another conversation. We've got our good buddy Jeff Gowing on the show as
What's up,
well.
everybody?
Oh, you've heard from him before. And it's one of my favorite conversations. We talk about it all the time, but is the confessional community conversation that you were on, Jeff. That's a favorite of mine. So thanks for that.
Definitely.
But we are excited to dive into a new conversation, and we've got a guest joining us as well, Sean.
Yeah. So my buddy Charlie, he and his wife Candace are good friends of Ashley and I. We met a few years ago as I was coming into a district level role with the Assemblies of God in Oregon. And Charlie also serves in a similar capacity in the great state of Louisiana. Sorry, that's, not totally accurate way of saying it, but
you
maybe it's close. Let's be real though. Some of you guys talk real
more water boy.
It's like, yeah,
Baba DJ.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what I love about Charlie and Candace is just their authenticity. And you say that sometimes, like, oh man, that guy's really authentic. But then you're kind of like, oh, but are they? Like some people like question, oh, really, are they? But with Charlie and Candace, I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it, and believe it. They love Jesus. They love one another. They love the church, the mission of Jesus in the kingdom. And so it's great to have him on, and I'm honored to serve alongside of him as fellow district youth and children's directors just in different states. And so thanks for being on, man. And we'll hop right in and say, maybe one or two things that you would think that our listeners would want to know about you, something maybe fun or different or something that not a lot of people maybe know, or that's something that's interesting. I know you're kind of, you're from the Bayou, so there's some interesting things that go down in Louisiana.
Yeah, man. When they say everybody in Louisiana, is fat and happy, it's pretty true. Culture, food, gathering of folks, hosting, family, all those things. And that's, we're the South, but it's also a blend of that whole French, Italian heritage that hit New Orleans and the whole Southeast. And so you got a little bit of that. But man, first off, thanks for inviting me, man. It's definitely an honor to be here. A couple quick things, I guess, to know about me. I definitely, I love outdoors. I'm an extroverted guy, but I love getting out and just being, whether it's fishing or hunting or hiking or whatever, that unplugging and resetting. My mind doesn't stop. You know what I mean? I'm a thinker. It could be, I don't know, could be anxiety, who knows what it is. It's just reality is I just don't stop thinking. And so being able to be at peace and do that. Other than that, man, I've been married 20 years almost. I think I'm at 19, 3 kids, trying to figure out 3 at 1 middle schooler, 1.5, one's 11, one's 13. So I've had more intentional conversations than it's my wife. Intentional conversations in the last two years. I think I've had 20, so I love that, maybe to lean into my kids, lean into my family. The older I get, man, it's less about position. It's more about posture. And so I'm really excited to be a part of that.
Well, yeah, you said you're a thinker. I'm going to throw it to Khalil here for the first question, but I also want to mention it's true. I like the way you think. It's always a challenge and an encouragement, but you're also working on your doctorate right now too, which is something probably you wouldn't just up and say, but so congrats on that, dude. I know it's
Thanks.
a hard, difficult road, and you are definitely somebody who challenges the way we think. So I also want to mention that too, but
that's awesome. We'll be praying for you in that process.
Yeah.
We may have a little bit of connection issue every now and then, so we might ask you to repeat something if we need to.
Sure.
But, I did want to ask, we've been thinking a lot about deconstruction, and when we started the show, we kind of wanted to engage in just conversations around how to live our faith in this kind of cultural moment and exploring church history and spiritual disciplines and all of that. But we've also just, our heart's grown for those who are wrestling and deconstructing. And we found that there's a segment of our listeners that are kind of going through that, or maybe they have a friend that's going through deconstruction in their faith. And this is kind of becoming a resource for them. And so we wanted to engage in some more conversations around that. And I just want to turn it over to you and see, are you noticing any more of a wave of deconstruction right now? What's your perspective on that? And then maybe you can kind of help us define that term a little bit and help shape where we go with that.
Yeah, I think that what I'm finding is that there's maybe we are kind of on the middle of the back end of a collision course with Western church culture, and just really what people are, with you throwing in also the whole move of transparency as being ideal in American culture, and where we are, and like we're no longer bound by duty, right? No longer are you going to work 50 years and get a watch, maybe like our grandparents did. I mean, the whole, was it the Great Resignation or whatever the word for it was? Everything's happening. It's not just church. It's a rethinking, and I believe a resetting on just getting to the why. The whole that came big 10 years ago, Simon Sinek, all that launched that. But man, deconstruction's been around for 70 years, since the 60s. It really started in the 20s, and the church world's 20, 30 years behind. And partly because we're testing and we're slow, and tradition is stronger than trends. But man, I think it's there, but I also am hopeful, because everything that's going on, the research you're seeing about Gen Z, Alpha, what nobody's talking about is what happened in the late 90s. So I want to throw something to y'all that's really fascinating to me. The late 90s, you remember that movie, The Perfect Storm?
Yeah.
It was like this ship captain in the Northeast, and like a hurricane or front, and something crazy happened. It was like the worst storm in 100 years or something crazy. I think we had the perfect storm of revealing authenticity. You had the beginnings of the church scandals with all the horrendous acts there, and the cover up, which was huge because it was in the Roman Catholic Church, and it began in other places. And it was like things that were sacrosanct no longer were. You had the stuff with Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton, and you had the beginnings, all that, where before, and you also had the advent of the internet. And so you had access to information, where in the 90s, World War II or the fifth, then you go to the Korean War and the Vietnam. I'm going somewhere with this, but all the wars, you didn't get information until it was like already processed, right? And then all of a sudden, even in the 90s, like you didn't hear about it, but now you hear about it with social media, with internet. So you had two things happen. You had the breaking down of idealism. Like think about it, how people looked at police officers across the board is different than this today. How they look at ministers is different. That you have to earn that trust, right? And you can't cover up all that junk, and you never should have, but there was that allowance. So in the late 90s, you had that perfect storm of breaking down of asserted means and the allowance of information. And I think we're on the tail end of that. And I think that I'm hopeful, because nothing escapes God. But I think you have a lot of people who are questioning what they believed and what they've experienced. I got further thoughts on maybe people kind of break down and they lose the entire piece of their faith. That happens. But I think we're just in a season where people are going, I can't ask these questions. And, we're not the first generation to ask that, by the way. That's another thought there. But I don't know if that directly answers your question. But I'm noticing it's been, but it's not the first time. It's something recent that's happening again, but I'm not discouraged by it.
Yeah. Jeff, did you have a question, man? You look like you were chomping at the bit a little bit. So I just want to.
Well, a couple questions with some of that stuff.
Sure.
I think we're seeing a disenfranchisement of tradition, right? Or I guess our recent traditions. Whether that's reaching back to ancient practices like meditation, a lot of like Eastern practices within that. And so I'm curious. For me, I feel like that's actually a pathway to truth in a post-truth world, in a sense of that we're beyond some of the superficial things or aesthetics that we've built in the church, whether that's a tradition or a system or a structure of faith that just breaks down so quickly when it's exposed to reality, that people are looking for something deeper. And sure, some of that might be superficially tied to feelings or vibes, whatever that is. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think I forgot who said it, but we're called to a reasonable faith, right? It's the love of your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, right? That's the oldest Jewish resuscitation. I forgot what they used to call it. It's a Greek or Hebrew word. out of the Torah, but it's like Jesus reinforced that, right? Like, love the Lord God with your mind and your heart. And then he goes on about your neighbor and all those other things. Like, there's attitude reflects behavior, thinking reflects attitude, reflects behavior. If there's no action, James says, without faith, without action, faith is dead. And it's not, those are always been there. I think what catches me is when you talk about like deconstruction is the whole point of deconstruction, like postmodernism, right? Whether, we know it's negative and base. And I don't mean that like negative and evil. I mean, like, you're trying to separate meaning from the context. Well, how do you separate faith, the word from faith, or my experience with faith? I have to have a starting spot, right? And so what I found is a lot of people are wrestling with a faith that was presented to them that didn't make sense. And so while exploring that separation, we lose the whole thing because we go so deep to nothingness. It's like Nietzsche. He's an influence of it, right? That, there's nothing. Well, to me, it's more. I mean, you want to have doubts, you have questions, but look, we all have them. I'm not perfect. We all got them, and we're all figuring it out. But I think you're right. I think meditation, the old practices, now, I think it just depends where you start. So if let's just say there's a continuum, and on the left side, I'm not sure if this is audio or visual, but on the left side, you have Catholicism. Then let's say you have Lutheranism, then Presbyterian, then Episcopal, Methodist, then Baptist, then Pentecostal, then Charismatic, and the monster drink lady all the way on the right side, whatever. The further left you get towards hierarchical trends, the more responsibility you have to have for freedom, right? You have to be able to not be so liturgical that it's dead, so to speak. Well, the furthest you go to the right side, and it's all charismatic and whatever, well, the more responsibility you better have about discipleship and the alert. Let's all over the place. And we've seen that for years. I think, to short answer you with all that I just said, I think that as long as the pathways lead us back to Jesus, that it's not a truth or your truth, then we could talk about Christianity. The moment we start doubting the divinity of Jesus, then we are separating from Christians and non-Christians. Mm-hmm. And I think your experience and your vibes and the word and trusted voices of elders, again, we're not the first generation. I think it all comes into play. There's no wrong with questions, but I think they all come into play.
Yeah. And to kind of define this term for listeners too, when I think about deconstruction, we can think about it in regards to constructing anything. And maybe just the image of Legos is helpful, right? If you build something cool with Legos, that's awesome. But if you start taking it apart and breaking the pieces back down, the point of doing that is so that you can rebuild something back up. And when it comes to a lot of what I am seeing culturally right now, whether it's in the church or outside of the church, is kind of a couple different things. And I'm interested in what you guys think about how these tie in, but I see really a lack of trust in authority. And so some of that is in politics and the government. I don't trust the government because I see
Mm-hmm.
things are happening. And so I'm pulling back my trust from that authority. I'm questioning them. You mentioned, police and questioning that authority.
Mm-hmm.
I can't trust the church because I see hypocrisy, or I see this, or I see that. And so I see a lot of people seeing things they don't like or questioning that and then pulling back and withdrawing. So I'm not going to trust the government. I'm not going to trust police. I'm not going to trust the church. I don't know if I can trust anyone. And they're left in this place where I feel like I can only trust myself. I've got to figure it out. I've got to find
Mm-hmm.
it. I've got to work on this. And then people are left feeling alone. They feel isolated. There's anxiety and stress because you're trying to navigate all these different things and discern what is the truth.
Right.
There's a multitude of different voices. And so what I'm seeing is a lot of people that seem to be deconstructing what was handed to them, but they're not building back up anything meaningful there. And
Right.
the whole world is just deconstructed and they don't know where to go from there either. So part of what I wonder too is if someone's going through that, deconstruction isn't necessarily bad, but how do we handle that? How do we navigate that process? Because I think all of us at some point question things that have been handed to us, but we want to rebuild back something stronger. And you mentioned building a stronger faith in Jesus, not just moving away from it entirely.
Yeah. So think the analogy or the imagery that comes to head, you use Legos. My kids are all in the age of Legos, right? They're getting out of it. So we literally have we think we spent like $500-700 on these Lego pieces it took us like 3 days to build. Well, now they're just sitting on the shelf and we're not framing them, so we're going to get rid of them. But they're at the base of their pieces. Here's where deconstructionism, I think, gets in trouble, or that could be twisting. I'll say two thoughts. One is that imagine we took these bricks and we broke this down. And imagine, and I'm going to use childish, I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I mean it in its innocent, most base form. Okay. So I'm not trying to say if someone gets like this, they get childish. I just mean we are at our root. All these feelings are validated. They're real feelings. They're real experiences. I'm never going to tell someone they don't have them. They're still real. And so then all of a sudden, if I'm playing with these things and I take these, I have a pile of pieces, and in my emotion and how I feel, I get aggravated or frustrated. I take my arm and I sweep the table, and there's now no pieces. You see, it's okay if you have the pieces, but all of a sudden, if whatever that thing that caused me to get to that, I'm frustrated or I'm angry or whatever or I'm just neutral. I just don't know. It doesn't have to be negative. Well, now there's no pieces on the board. So now I have no faith. And that's where you also hear the verbiage of your authentic truth, your authentic self. Like there's also a verbiage. If we believe in a God, we also believe in what the word says, that there's an accuser, right? The devil, all those things. And in reality, shaped by the word, that I also think it's not a standing still, but there's a resistance. And so if those things are perversions in the sense of twistings or taintings, I don't mean with the, just in a morality thing, then I think if we can get to the point where not only we're just doubting how we got there, but all of a sudden now I'm doubting my own faith. Here's the second thing I want to say. I also think that there is a God. It's just, who do you call it that? Because what you just said, if I don't trust anyone but how I think, notice how it's rare that guys start doubting their own self. Because I'm either God, I know it's truth, or I'm going to be humble enough to go, I really don't know. And usually when someone gets a stronghold atheistic things, it's usually an experience, an emotion, anger, or that's what I've noticed. And I'm not trying to paint a box. Anyway, I'm going to shut up. What do you got to say? I see it's not me teaching.
I do think that's a really good observation that when we're questioning things we might not notice about ourselves, is we're saying, like you just called it out gently, but if I don't trust anyone else, I only trust me. Well, then we have put ourselves in the position of ultimate authority and of God. And I think that's
correct. Absolute truth.
Well, and I know Jeff's going to say something here, but then
I see it.
We have a problem because one of two things in general will happen. This is Timothy Keller originally, not from me and other people. You will either lower your standard for yourself because you cannot meet it, and in the expectation of everybody else's to adhere to your standard, so you judge them and look down upon them, yet you've lowered the standard for yourself because you can't keep it yourself as God, or you walk in shame, and it's a downward spiral because you cannot, it's a house of cards, you cannot build your life upon your own morality. And so
right.
We are not God, and yet we try to play him all the time. It's classic Genesis 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt.
What you got, Jeff?
So I just find it interesting too that this really comes back to not a lack of understanding of who God is, or a presumption that I know who God is and what God is like and what God thinks and how God thinks and how God reacts. And I find it just interesting that most of the New Testament writers, whether it be in the Gospels or the prison epistles, they came, and even Jesus himself came from the perspective that we don't know what God is like, but we can learn. Mm-hmm. We don't. It was very humble posture of like, we don't know what God is like, but we can learn. And in a day and age of questioning where we want to trap people in that. I just was reading recently, Basil's on the Holy Spirit, and I just find it really interesting. He's writing to a friend that is asking him a question, and he says, in his intro, he's like, even more though I admire your proposing questions, not for the sake of testing as many do, but to discover truth itself. There are people who throw out words not so that they may receive something useful from them, but so they may seem to have just a pretext for war if they find answers that do not accord with their own liking. And that was written in the 300s.
Right.
And like yet today. It sounds like today it's
so.
Well,
script of that.
Right. Well, that's why, let's go back to the 40s, and you're in Germany, and you're Dietrich Bonhoeffer around him, and the church is saying that, hey, it's okay for Nazi. But the church in Germany was they were kind of implicit, but explicit. And then people of faith rose up, right? Or you're 200 years ago, we're in whatever, South Carolina, and scripture is used for slavery and against slavery, right? And you can go back so many times. And it's like, and that's kind of what, and I'm not like, I've just kind of got to the point is that we're talking about people. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a believer, but I'm still a dude, and I'm not Jesus. I think as we get older and mature, we put things in our life that hopefully I'm not dealing with the same big stuff I dealt when I just started being with Christ. But I can also be disillusioned and wake up one day and I'm loving Jesus and I'm a pastor and I'm a doctor and I'm all this other stupid stuff. And then I have a hole in my heart because I haven't gotten the word for myself. I haven't worshiped God with my problems and my issues. I just worship him when I sing a song. Okay, great. I know the lyrics of a song, but is my heart worshipful? So all I'm trying to say is what I'm hearing from you is I'm not judgmental of people asking the question because it's a reasonable faith. Jesus challenged us, right? He goes, guys, I've been watching The Chosen. I'm not trying to get crazy and that my family was watching. I just love seeing Jesus put in kind of normal terms. One of my favorite parts so far is in season 1, when James and John shows up next to Jesus and they just, the jock in a position. And he was like, chill, dude, too soon. Like, it was just the way he did it. I was like, Jesus was fully man and fully God. Like, you don't think, he had full temptation. Like, we're not even getting to that. It's like, you don't think he didn't deconstruct what he was seeing? And he did. He called out the Pharisee. You see it over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's true.
I think, Jeff, you call out something really good too, when you said we can get to know God. And, that comes back to, we have plenty of episodes and we're continuing to do them on the attributes of God, what God is like, his character and his nature. Because, it's just some thoughts while you were talking. I thought about the fact that, we may be questioning authority, but we want to be careful not to question all authority to the point that we don't trust God even.
Yeah.
And so we struggle with that. I think, to me, and when I think about a lot of things in faith, a lot of it comes down to, is God trustworthy?
Yeah.
And, we see things in our lives. We see injustice in the world. We see pain and suffering in our own lives. We see where it seems like evil is winning and righteousness isn't. And it's addressed in Job and in Ecclesiastes
and the Psalms.
And the Psalms. It seems like evil people get good and good people don't get it. And there's this wrestle we see. And so raise that question of, is God trustworthy? And, my heart here is just to constantly remind ourselves, God is trustworthy. But if we pull back from any possibility of God having any authority over us, we'll never lean in enough to learn that he's trustworthy. And so I think we also need to, we can have conversations about if government is trustworthy or if other authority figures in our lives are trustworthy, but God promises to be trustworthy. And until we lean into that, we're going to fall back into nothing and into that void of despair. And so maybe there's some thoughts on that too, Jeff, before I had another question.
Yeah. Well, what I was getting to too is that if we are hungry for truth, if we're hungry to question for the sake to discover truth itself, then we have to come back to the Holy Spirit, because he's the spirit of truth, right? And so in our questioning, it's okay. Like, obviously there's some really poor pictures of Christians. There's some leaders that blow it, that make terrible mistakes, that are harsh. And even on my days, I'm harsh to my daughter. I can blow it. I can not be as loving or patient as I should. The Holy Spirit's building that up in me. And sometimes that is enough to push someone away. However, in our questioning, we have to come back to who is true. What is bedrock? And if we're coming to the place of, I do want to wrestle with what I'm experiencing right now, because there's a disconnect from the God I've heard about and the reality of how his followers are living it out, or my experience, or I've been promised to feel or have a certain experience, and that doesn't look like my life whatsoever. I feel tired or burned out, whatever. But we have to come back in our questioning and our tearing apart back to, okay, Holy Spirit, you are true. And if you're the one that's pointing us to all truth, you're going to guide us in the re-enchantment of our lives, the re-enchantment of our faith, and our delights. So I just wanted to kind of point that out as well, along the ideas of questioning.
Can I throw something in with that? I think one of the greatest theological movies in the last 20 years is a movie called Good Will Hunting. I've heard that. You've read that movie or watched it with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and then there's a couple other people in there. Robin Williams in his scene in the counseling. I was watching it the other day, and you have a guy who's so intelligent that truth became, or his ability became, his shield. And he says, and he goes, and Robin Williams' character, for those who didn't see it, was talking about, his wife passed from cancer like 2 or 3 years prior. And he's and it became a shell of himself, really. He's just grieving with his dead wife. And in this process, they start helping one another. But the conversation goes, what I remember my wife? I remember that she had, he tells a story about how she woke herself up in the middle of the night by farting. And she woke herself up and she didn't know. And he's laughing uncontrollably. He goes, I didn't have the heart to tell her that she woke herself up. And he's so laughing so hard that it's an actor, but you don't realize it. I mean, Robin Williams was amazing. And so here's the point, is that he's talking about truth and love through an experience. It's about commitment, like marriage and love. And he's telling this character, he's like, why are you going to be with this girl? And he's like, no, because it's perfect right now. If she's going to mess it up. And the whole point of the rest of the whole movie is love is messy. And you can be standoffish. And they had this whole other conversation about missing this great Boston Red Sox games. They both were from Boston. He says it was about a girl, right? It's a beautiful movie. It won Oscars. Okay. I think and that's why deconstruction is hard for me. The whole point of deconstruction was break apart meaning or words without meaning, when the whole part of our faith is that faith is the substance unseen. It's when you don't see, you have to believe, right? So it's completely flipped. And it's like, okay, I get it. We got to break the pathways. You got to break up the Legos, but I still have some blocks. Mm-hmm. And I think that's it. I think we forget it's with a person. This isn't a philosophy. This isn't Aristotelian, theory. This is a relationship with Jesus Christ, or with God through Jesus, whatever, the Trinity, all that good stuff. And I think if we separate it to just mental and forget the heart, it's no different me loving the idea of being in love versus really being in love. Because being in love sucks. It's hard. You have to give up yourself, right? Like, it's building a family. I mean, it sucks, but it's beautiful, because me loving my wife 20 years in isn't this big thing. It's picking up my underwear. It's, dealing with my kid when I don't want to, right? And I'm going off, but it's relationship. Yeah. And part of it, I say all this for this. I feel like a lot of folks get hurt in the early stages, or maybe, what set me off on this? When you said government and the church, their ideals. I don't have a relationship with the government. I don't have a relationship with the church. I have a relationship with a pastor and a church believer and the mayor, if I get to know him, it's different. And I think if we keep it to ideal, we'll be just like Good Will Hunting with our freaking hands out and never get into the mess. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what that was. It just kind of stirred something in me when you were talking. I was like, dude, it is hard. And pastors are held to a higher standard. And people are messy. But does that mean that Jesus is a liar?
Right.
What supports that truth? Okay, I went off. Sorry. You got me going.
That's good.
I think as you were talking, and I think this connects, but I was just processing some things in my own mind, and I was thinking about deconstruction in the sense that a healthy deconstruction might actually, instead of deconstructing whether or not faith is true and pulling away from that, it might just be deconstructing some of our preconceived notions or deconstructing our own expectations. So, things I'm sure we all see a lot is someone comes to faith and think, now Jesus is going to make my life better or easier. And then things get harder. And so it feels like I expected easier, but things got harder. Or, I thought when I gave my life to Jesus, I wouldn't suffer anymore. And then you experience hard things. Well, those expectations weren't actually biblical promises, but false expectations that we built up in some way. And so maybe, because I've experienced that too, where in my life, and especially early faith, I had these expectations and then those things got rattled. But ultimately what they got replaced with was deeper truth. It's not that I will never suffer or experience hard things as a Christian, but God will be in the midst of that suffering with me. He'll carry me through it. And the suffering isn't the end of the story. So,
but isn't that formation, not necessarily deconstruction? Like, because I feel like deconstruction is a departure from formation.
But if I construct, like if I constructed this idea of what it would be, and that idea doesn't hold up, then that idea gets deconstructed.
It's almost like a scaffolding if you think about it in some sense as a metaphor. I don't think it's two things that are opposite. I think all of it is forming us. Right. So I'm glad you brought that up though too, Jeff, because we can't forget the formation process. Definitely. Because you can't, like what Charlie's saying, void of relationship, it doesn't, reconstruction or formation, and it doesn't work. We have to realize too at the same time that this is, I mean, AJ Swoboda says it all the time, and he said it in his book, and we've interviewed him too, and he said it on the interview with us. The point is Jesus. So if we're just trying to go in and destroy, like allow my faith to, or I would say this, I'll say it this way. How do we define Christianity really matters as well. So I'm talking with a friend right now and who is really struggling with Christianity. And so the questions I will have for him is, what do you mean by Christianity? So we have, like you said, Khalil, these preconceived notions of what things should be like. Well, those things need to be reworked and with greater truth. Now that's formation too. So I think it's interesting, because especially when trying to define terms and stuff. But
so let me say this. So you and I were talking about this new phrase I have called trusted voices. Trusted voices to me is just another word for mentorship. In one of our papers for class, we were talking about just generational change and how theology and orthopraxy and all, what we do, how we do it, blah, 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 orthodoxy and praxy, all that stuff. Well, the stuff we're dealing with is the same stuff that the Germans in the 18th century dealt with, that, every generation, right? The Luther and his dudes in the 16th, 17th century, it's people. And we're all trying to find God, and we're trying to understand who Jesus. I mean, can you imagine you talking about you said earlier, the first 300 years, and now the people who knew Jesus are dead, the people who knew Jesus are dead. And now it's like, what do we have? And they had to have a big, council. What do we believe? And there was all these theories, but this has always been happening, right? So let's talk about truth. So everyone who's deconstructing is because they ran into something that don't make sense. And that experience is overshadowing the ability to know more. Right. So they're starting to know more, but they got this. It's like wearing glasses that you're seeing things with, or sunglasses. That's how I believe. It could be a question. It could be an experience. It could be a hurt. It could be something. Not to be negative. It's just something that goes, that don't make sense. Oh, well. And then it's like, well, and then that's when you see it. So if in a charismatic world, man, people weren't really being discipled well. So now I'm going to go be reformed. And all I'm going to do is, believe in because theology is so strong. Well, okay. Well, now I'm going to throw away all the experiences I had. You see people do that. The question is, are they bitter as they do it? Is it a negative slant, or if it's just, I want to know more? Because when I want to know more, here's trusted voices. Are there people in my life, and evangelical, not the evangelical right Trump loving church. I mean, the evangelical, the body of Christ that kind of agrees on certain, right? And so, wait, I'm not the first person to ask this question. So what does the word say? Okay, what translation? I don't really care what translation. Just read one of the translations. What's the word say? And then who do I trust to invite into that? Who's living it out? What do you think? Because, you know what I mean? And I think part of it doesn't happen because also we're not even getting into it, is because people get lazy too. And we just want the first soundbite. I know I'm about to open up another can of worms. We don't got time, but it's like we're in a culture of sound bites.
We call it.
And so you're talking about
TikTok.
You know what I mean? Again, it's right. It's ideals, but I'm like, but if I could, imagine I'm married for 20, I am about to be married 20 years, and I've had to figure out do I still love my wife? I'm not 25 years old anymore. Do I even like my wife? Is she like me? And we had to kind of rebuild. Hold on, we're in love, but do we love one another? And you see people fall out, from an adulterous thing, or they just get discouraged, or they just wind up raising kids. It's the same concept. And all I'm trying to say is, right. We treat like that in relationship with those we love, but with God, I think we get idealistic, and we don't treat it like a relationship, and it becomes this theory, and it's like, well, why are we missing it? Because I wouldn't treat my kid like that. Oh, I'm going to treat God like that.
It's really
And it's hard, but that's what I think happens. Okay, I went off, but yeah.
Using the marriage metaphor and just even our approach and our relationship with God, it's interesting that, so many times when we fall in love or we start following Jesus, there's so much joy, there's so much delight, there's so much passion, but delight without discipline, it dissipates. It runs out of steam. There's not
100%.
enough there to sustain it. However, when delight and discipline dance, relationships thrive.
You always have great alliteration.
You really do. I mean, there's keywords there, Jeff.
That's pretty beautiful. Hey, do y'all know why the 7 years go?
No, I was just gonna make a joke. You go ahead.
I was saying, why you're talking about marriage? Why does 7 years is the greatest rate for divorce?
Oh yeah,
think about it.
Yeah, it's because
why?
I can't pretend anymore.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's because people start having kids, and you're raising kids at that point. And so now I don't have date nights and junk. No, think about it. By year 7, you probably have a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, and now you got to deal with somebody who can't do anything for themselves.
Right.
And so now we're not having fun anymore. It's all serious, and it's a duty.
It's good.
I didn't mean to kill your joke there. I'm sorry. I want to hear this joke now.
Please, thank you. You controlled the situation.
I
think put water on the fire.
I'll say this, and
now we're stoking it back up.
No, this is not the joke. I'll say this, and then we'll throw it to Khalil to conclude. Say that 10 times fast.
Don't.
I would love for you to say that one more time, Jeff, because I feel like that was very important, even though I was.
Did you make that up on the fly?
I was writing my message for this week. We're talking about prayer, and it's in there. So yeah,
dude, that's good.
Go for it, man.
So yeah, delight without discipline dissipates. Like every relationship runs out of steam. You don't have enough to sustain it. But when discipline and delight learn to dance, relationships thrive.
When they learn to dance, I love that. It's very good.
I'm stealing it. That's tweetable.
Tweetable. I already posted it, so I will come after you guys. No, hey Charlie, question for you as we kind of wrap up. Just if you could help us really practically. You got into some of the practicals as you talked about finding trusted voices and that experience in faith piece. But if we were going to really simplify it, I'm sitting at the table for you, your coach and me, or our listener right now, and we're walking through that deconstructive process. What are just some really practical things that we could do as next steps to work through that process in a healthy way?
Yeah. So my wife and I have been going through this for about 7 months. We'd have to talk another time, but completely just resetting. I'm going through a process of, I call it, like you said, the building blocks. What are the building blocks for health? I think first I would say, one, I would think that you have to be authentic and honest. If the pathways that you're on, are they leading to God or from God? Sooner or later, a truth beyond ourselves has to navigate us. If we're unwilling to trust anything, then the only person we're trusting is ourselves, and that's a scary place. It's deception. It is the reminiscent of the first sin when Lucifer said, "Can I raise myself to the first high?" The 6 I statements in Isaiah was pride. When he saw who he was and said, "I should get that glory." Well, it's just the same thing. We just don't speak like that. We live like that when we think we got it all together. So one, what in the world, or where are we? And God says he does not tempt us, but he does test and refine our faith. Just like I allow my kids to go through things. It's not going to kill them, but I know it's going to make them stronger because they need to learn. Our Father does the same thing, but on a spiritual, metaphysical plane, right? And so that's the thing. We just don't talk about it much. So I would evaluate where you are and just test the waters. Is this leading me from God? Well, it's probably not God if it isn't. And I'm not trying to be simplifying and, one thing justifying the other. It's just sooner or later, you got to kind of go, where am I going with this? Now, 2, you got to invite people in the room. I got people who are not impressed by me. I need to tell me, hey, bro, yeah, I can, this is real. This is not just to check me, but just to see, am I just holding on to something too hard or whatever it may be? It could be anything. I am very intentional about, in every area of my life for 20 years now, to find brothers and fathers, meaning I don't mean spiritual fathers and getting all weird with that. I mean, if there's somebody who's doing well financially and they're 10 years ahead of me, I want to go sit and figure out what they've done. Or they have kids who are not crackheads, hey, I want to know what they've done, right? Whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go find that out because I don't want to be 60 years old and go, I was ignorant because I choose to be ignorant. You know, I might be ignorant in a good way and I just don't know. Well, none of us know. So one, be authentic. Two, be intentional about who is not impressed by me that can help me, walk me through. That means getting counseling, get counseling. That means you got to call someone. I used to tell my leaders this and then they got offended. So I stopped. My youth pastors say, hey, if you need to curse somebody out, call me up and curse me out. I'd rather you curse me than curse your pastor and get fired. Yeah. Right. And like, you know, some of my churchy people are like, oh, I said curse. Well, what do you want me to say? Because that's real, you know,
Right.
But find someone you can vent, brothers in arms. And finally, I would say, what are you doing? Meaning you sooner or later got to act on it. You can talk and think and deconstruct all day. But if you aren't contributing to a community, if you aren't living faith out, then all you're doing is the equivalent of the Monday morning quarterback after NFL saying what you would do, but you're sitting on the couch and you're not playing a game. It's easy to break down and analyze. But if if you got some skin in the game, it's harder to, you know what I mean? It keeps you grounded. And I would say that, man, I think that the best, I'll leave you with this. I'll close this out. The greatest moments I've had with God came after a season when I didn't want to be around God. And I believe that is, if God is real and the devil is real and the devil can't create anything, but he sees what the Holy Spirit's doing. He sees it, right? He's an eternal being. Like he's just not judged. Well, whatever, how do you want to play that? But I'm just saying is that God's doing something in your life and I'm going to service. So I didn't want to go, but I went and then God spoke to me or met me there. Why? Because the devil was trying to punk me out. And so again, I'm holding on with some anchors of faith, but man, at the end of the day, I'd rather live a life that has joy and peace in it. And there's no heaven. And this is all a bunch of junk than just be all by myself. And I don't know, all I got is myself. So
really good, really practical. And there are definitely some nuggets of truth in there that are worth a replay.
Yeah,
for sure. So, man, thanks so much for this conversation. It's been awesome.
Yeah.
And, you know, for those listening, we just want to say thank you for being a part of the conversation. And as always, give us a rating and review. It means the world to us. And we always do this at the end, but, you know, a response for all of us as you're getting people around your table and continuing these conversations. I just sense the Holy Spirit saying, get someone around your table who has gone through what you're wrestling through, is somewhere down the line and has a healthy faith on the other side of it. Get them around your table and ask them to help you and pour into your life. And may we grow a deep, rich faith on the other side of our formation, as you said, Jeff. Thanks so much. Yep. And until next time.